Hey guys, welcome to video 107. It's been a while since our last video, and in that one I tested the guitar amplifier that we designed and built, and I do want to come back to it again for a more complete evaluation. But for right now, I'm going to start getting back into transistor circuit analysis again pretty soon, so I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of do a quick review of bipolar transistor operation to get things moving again. Now, of course, I've got a whole bunch of videos out about transistor circuit analysis and design, and you can go back and look at those. But this is just kind of something to get me moving again, and maybe it'll be a nice review for you guys as well. Now, I'm sure everyone knows there are two types of bipolar junction transistor, NPN and PNP. Here are their symbols with their terminals identified. And we know that the NPN is going to be the most commonly encountered version. So when I do all of my derivations and descriptions, that's the device I'm going to use. And down here, I have all of the voltages and currents for a given NPN transistor shown, and we can relate all of these using Kirchhoff's voltage law and Kirchhoff's current law and these two equations. Now, of all the voltages and currents shown here, the two that are typically most important to us on a practical level are the collector current and collector to emitter voltage. Now, sometimes we need to know VBE and the emitter current as well, but usually IC and VCE are the ones we're most interested in. Now, fundamentally, the transistor is described by Shockley's equation, which we see here, and it says that the collector current is equal to the saturation current I sub S times this ugly exponential here, e to the VBE. VBE is the bias applied from base to emitter, divided by eta times VT. Eta is the emission coefficient. It ranges somewhere between 1 and 2. Typically it's about 1.5, but very often, just for convenience, we'll pretend it's 1. V sub T is the thermal voltage equivalent. This is a quantum mechanical parameter. It's defined as KT over Q. K is Boltzmann's constant. T is absolute temperature. Q is the charge of an electron, and at normal operating temperatures it works out to be about 26 millivolts, and most of the time we'll just pretend it's constant at 26 millivolts. Now, up inside the parentheses here in Shockley's equation, we're subtracting 1 from this exponential, but most of the time we can just ignore this because under normal operating conditions, e to this power works out to be 1,000,000 or more, so subtracting 1 really doesn't make much difference. So we'll usually use this approximation for Shockley's equation, and that's shown over here above a graph of the equation. Here, the voltage where the transistor turns on substantially is labeled V sub phi. It's often called the barrier potential, and sometimes it'll be labeled VBE on, but I usually like to use V sub phi because it's easier to write. And typically for a silicon transistor under normal operating conditions, the barrier potential is about 0.7 volts. Now, if we happen to be using a germanium transistor, it would be closer to 0.35 volts. And, we'll need that when we use germanium transistors, but most of the time we're going to be dealing with silicon devices. Now, another thing I should mention over here in Shockley's equation is I sub S, the saturation current. That's the leakage current from base to emitter for this PN junction, and typically it's very, very small. For a transistor like a 2N3904, it's usually less than 1 nanoamp. For a large junction power transistor like a 2N3055 or something similar, it might be in the microamp range, but in either case, it's typically a very, very small value compared to the operating current of the transistor I sub C. And I also should mention that the saturation current is extremely temperature dependent. It typically doubles for every 10 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, and that can be an issue in some circuit designs. But fortunately for us, most of the time when we're analyzing or designing circuits, we don't need to worry about this horrible, ugly equation here. If we had to use it all the time, transistor circuit analysis would suck. But again, there are a lot of approximations we can use so that we don't have to resort to this stuff. Now, some of the relationships that are important to know are shown down here in this box, where collector current is equal to beta times the base current. Beta is assumed to be constant for a given transistor. Typically it can range from maybe 50 to 300, but very often I'll just approximate it as being 100 because that's usually close enough to the truth. Now, the emitter current we know from KCL is equal to the sum of the collector current and the base current, but we can also define it in terms of beta and the base current by using this equation. It's equal to beta plus 1 times IB. Now, looking at this, because beta is usually pretty big, somewhere around 100, the difference between beta and beta plus 1 is pretty insignificant. And that means we could approximate IE as being beta times IB, the same as I sub C. And that's something we'll do very often. We'll assume that IE and IC are approximately equal. Now, there's another parameter, alpha. I should have defined it. It's equal to IC over IE. And we can also define it in terms of beta, beta over beta plus 1. But again, remember, because beta plus 1 isn't that much bigger than beta, this works out to be very close to 1 most of the time, and we'll just approximate it as 1 most of the time as well. Now, we can also define beta in terms of alpha. We see that here, alpha over 1 minus alpha. And again, coming over to this approximation box over here, we see that the VBE on value V sub phi is typically about 0.7 for silicon, and another value listed here is VCE saturation of approximately 0 volts. And this is the collector to emitter voltage when a transistor is turned fully on, when it's said to be in saturation. And we're going to take a look at that over here on this set of collector curves. The collector characteristic curves shown here are pretty typical of what you'd get for a transistor like a 2N3904. And if we took the ratio of collector current to base current for a given curve, we'd see that this transistor has a beta of 100. 6 milliamps divided by 60 microamps is 100, and so on for the rest of these curves. Now, one of the main things that we notice about the curves is that once VCE gets up to about 0.2 volts, VCE sat, these curves just about level off, and that's an indication of why we would model a bipolar junction transistor as a current source, okay? And in this particular case, because we're using base current to control collector current, it would be modeled as a current-controlled current source. Now, these curves are great if you want to analyze a transistor in really fine detail, but most of the time we don't need to use these. Unlike vacuum tube circuit design, we're not going to be dependent on these curves for much. So let me go over to the next page and let's talk about the 3 regions of operation for a transistor. Over here on the left-hand side of the page, we've got a typical biasing equivalent circuit for an NPN transistor. The biasing circuit is used to establish the no-signal operating point, which we call the Q point of the transistor. Over here on the right-hand side of the page, we've got a DC load line, and that's a graph of all possible operating points for the transistor, given the circuit components we've got. Now, our Q point or operating point here is typically located somewhere between saturation and cutoff, okay? And when it is located somewhere on this line between these limits, the transistor is said to be operating in the active region. The active region is where the collector curves are relatively flat. Now, if we apply a large enough voltage here to the base emitter junction, we can saturate the transistor. That is, we can turn it on as hard as it can be turned on, and we get the maximum possible collector current. We call that IC sat, and under those conditions, VCE sat is approximately 0 volts, and that's represented by this yellow point here on the DC load line. If we were to remove bias altogether, not forward bias our base emitter junction, the transistor would be in cutoff where it acts like an open circuit. We get no collector current and VCE is its maximum value. In this case, it would be equal to VCC, and that's shown here by this purple point on the DC load line. Most of the time when we're designing small signal or low power amplifiers, we're going to locate the Q point somewhere near the middle of the load line. This is called Class A operation. There are other classes of operation, Class B, Class AB, Class C, and so on, but we're not worried about those right now. We're probably mostly going to be dealing with Class A amplifiers. Now notice that I don't have a model for the transistor in the active region shown on this page. I just have models for saturation and cutoff. We're going to go on over to the next page and look at active region models for the transistor. Let's start over here on the left-hand side of the page where we've got a practical common emitter amplifier. We're using capacitive coupling, and it's a very simple biasing circuit just using a base resistor. And we're fully bypassing the emitter to ground, so this circuit would probably give us quite a bit of voltage gain. Now, the AC equivalent circuit shown below is derived by assuming all capacitors are short circuits at the signal frequency we're operating at, and the VCC node here is a short to ground for signals as well. This gives us a resistor from the base to ground in parallel with Vin, and RC and RL effectively in parallel here loading the collector. I would typically lump these two together and call them R prime C, and likewise if I had more stuff in the base circuit I'd lump those together and call them R prime B. As far as the transistor itself goes, I'm going to assume that it's biased up into the active region, so it's a Class A amplifier. And when that's the case, we can model the transistor using either the R or T model shown here, or the equivalent pi model. Let's start with the R model first. In this case, the collector side of the circuit is a current-controlled current source, IC equals beta times IB, and the emitter side of the circuit is the dynamic emitter resistance of the forward biased base emitter junction. We're calling that little re, and it's defined as eta times Vt over ICQ. And remember, very often we'll assume eta equals 1, so it's V sub t over ICQ. And remember, V sub t is about 26 millivolts at normal operating temperatures. Now, the R model can be a little bit deceptive because if you look into the base terminal, it looks like you're going to see an infinite resistance up here into the collector. That's the internal resistance of this source. And it looks like you see little re down this way, but that's not really the case. Because of interaction between these two currents and this dependent source, we actually see little re beta plus 1 times this value looking into the base. And that's why some people prefer the pi model, because it accounts for this effect directly. Instead of looking at little re, we're looking at r sub pi, which is beta plus 1 times little re. And because beta is typically 100 or so, we can approximate that as being about equal to beta times little re. So what we could do is substitute either one of these models into the circuit and derive all of the gain equations and so on, but I'm not going to do that here. If you want to see how that's done, you can go back to my previous videos, and you can also see where r pi is derived from little re. But what we're going to do next is just take a quick look at the 3 different amplifier configurations. Okay, the 3 amplifier configurations are shown over here. We've got the common emitter, the common collector, or as I usually call it, the emitter follower, and the common base configurations. The common emitter amplifier is the one you're going to see most often, and here we've got a stripped down version with no biasing components shown. The input is applied to the base, the output is taken from the collector, and typically this kind of amplifier is going to give us a lot of voltage gain, and it also exhibits phase inversion. So as we can see down here, if the input is this small sine wave, the output is going to be a larger inverted sine wave. Coming over to the emitter follower, we're again applying the input signal to the base, but this time we're taking the output from the emitter terminal. One of the characteristics of this amplifier is that its voltage gain is always going to be at least a little bit less than 1. So as we can see down here, if we put in a small sine wave, we're going to get out another sine wave that's just a tiny bit smaller usually, and it doesn't exhibit phase inversion. And finally, coming over to the common base configuration, this time we're applying our input signal to the emitter terminal, taking the output from the collector, and this amplifier is capable of giving significant voltage gain, very similar to the common emitter, but it does not provide phase inversion. Now, all the main characteristics of these amplifiers are summarized over here, but just for the sake of review, I'm giving you the gain definitions here. Voltage gain is V out over V in. Current gain is the load current divided by the input current. Power gain is power out to the load divided by power in delivered by this source. And it's also equal to the product of voltage gain and current gain. Now, coming to the summary of their characteristics, the common emitter amplifier, the one you're going to see most often, inverts, and it has a relatively high voltage gain. The current gain is something less than beta. It's got the highest power gain of all three configurations. Its input resistance is medium or moderate, and its output resistance is as well. Now, the emitter follower has the lowest output resistance, and that's the reason that we would use it. We'd be trying to drive a low resistance load, and having a low output resistance makes that feasible. It always has voltage gain less than 1. Its current gain is always less than beta, and its power gain is always less than its current gain, which is also less than beta. It's got a medium input resistance, low output resistance. And finally, the common based amplifier would be used when you need frequency response that extends into very, very high frequencies. It's the best frequency response with all other things being equal. It's got relatively high voltage gain. The current gain is always less than 1, and its power gain is always less than beta. Very low input resistance, which can be a problem in some applications, and it's got a medium output resistance. Okay, that just about concludes this quick review of bipolar transistor characteristics. I can't go over everything. That would take, I don't know, maybe 100 hours, and that's all contained in my previous videos. But what I want to do next is go down and just take a look at a sample of some of the amplifiers that we've analyzed and designed in previous videos. We've got all kinds of different compound transistor configurations, push-pull, Class A voltage divider biasing, collector feedback biasing, multiple stage amplifiers, and of course we did vacuum tube amplifiers. Shown here is a typical Class A transformer coupled, and we also talked about vacuum tube differential amplifiers a bit, and that's the next topic we're going to go into, except that we're going to be using bipolar transistors, and that will lead into the design and use of operational amplifiers or op amps and so on. So again, what we're going to look at next will be differential amplifiers using BJTs, and we'll also look at MOSFETs and things too, but that's something to look forward to. And this wraps it up for today's video. I will see you guys next time around. And hopefully I'll also get a chance to revisit the guitar amplifier design and build project again one of these days.